life expectancy of the granite cutters was well below average because they were constantly inhaling the dust and the particles of stone. And so they die of lung failure, essentially. And yet they could go out there and run around on a wet, muddy pitch, kicking a heavy, wet leather ball is kind of amazing. And the same with the coal miners as well.
In the US, the soccer boom is always supposedly around the corner. And that clouds our view here of the game's history in this country. Whether the US has soccer as a sport number one, or what is a sport number one, and why soccer may not be it here, is kind of irrelevant today. That history in its own right is what we focus on. It's what Brian Bunk focuses on in his new book, Beyond the Field: How Soccer Built Community in the United States. Brian is a historian at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst and has already written history of the early game in the US with the title From Football to Soccer. This is kind of a sequel, a collection of local stories, and there are a lot of stories around immigrant identity in here. And I'm reminded of what Oscar Handlin, who was kind of a dean in American immigration history, said a few decades ago. He said, "Once I thought to write a history of the immigrants in America, then I discovered that the immigrants were American history." Well, for today, we could say that Brian Bunk wrote a book about the history of soccer and community in the US, and we find out soccer and community are American history in its own right. I hope you enjoyed this, especially if you're listening from Europe. Despite the title of the podcast, we're not snobby about tying this game to any particular culture or country here, or what do we call it, soccer or football. And because the World Cup is here next year and the last qualifying rounds just got played this past week, it seems fitting to do this episode now and return to the topic of betting and football that I teased last week in the near future. Speaking of the World Cup, yes, Austria made it to the World Cup in North America, the first time since 1998 in France. And I'm not really into national teams. As you know, I look forward to seeing Sturm and West Ham and Degerfors and Železničar on the screen as well. By the way, Bosnia, I would have been happy too if you had beaten Austria and gone to the World Cup. And I would take a visit to a game in the second German Bundesliga, to a national team game any day. But I have to think about my national team issue a little bit now, because many of the conversations about the game I care about will also be about the country I live in over the next year. Plus, I teach US history for the most part. I've actually been thinking about a 3 to 4 part road movie around the game in the US for a European audience. So if one of you Europeans out there knows an outlet that might be interested in this concept, let me know. Anyways, Jonathan Wilson, British football writer, famous, put it well in the podcast Libero, which ran last week. And he said, because of the final round of the World Cup qualifiers, the many great stories that were made, that's actually the greatest week of football ever. And I don't quite think that, but he also said something that made me reconsider a bit when it comes to national teams. You see, top teams have many fans that choose them around the world. And I've never had to do that. I've never had to choose a club. I've never had that experience. I'm a Sturm fan because my dad is. It really is that simple. And West Ham caught me later when I wasn't looking for a club, let alone a Premier League one. But with national teams, almost everyone has that experience that I had. You don't get to choose really. And I have to wrap my head around talking about this World Cup now, I guess, and about national teams, including my own. And to help us toward the World Cup and for a look at the history of the early game in the country that is about to host the world for it, we're talking to Brian Bunk. I hope you have fun on this tour from east to west, from coast to coast. Brian, we just talked before and I said, always nice to know who in the US is behind names, books, articles that appear on soccer and that are able to give, especially me as a European, an introduction to American soccer history in its own right, not compared to necessarily other parts of the world, not compared to other leagues of the world, but soccer history as U.S. history, as U.S. cultural history. We'll visit a whole host of American cities, I think, today in the course of this talk. But first, introduce yourself a little bit, especially in your relationship to soccer, or as somebody else might say, football. What's your connection to the game? How did you get into writing about this as well?
Soccer, where I grew up, was not really, and when I grew up, was not really a particularly popular sport. I mean, our high school, for instance, didn't have teams.
Where did you
I never really had much in Minnesota and Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, there were the Minnesota Kicks when I was a kid, but I didn't really follow them very much at all, and they didn't exist for very long at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really have much exposure to soccer growing up. I kind of knew a little bit about it. And then I went to graduate school and I studied modern European history, particularly the history of Spain. And as most people probably know, soccer is big in Europe. And so
I haven't heard of that.
So I took a kind of passing interest in the sport. One of my friends in graduate school was born in Barcelona. And so he's a huge Barcelona fan. His family were socios of the club and stuff like that.
FC, not Espanyol.
Right. Okay. FC Barcelona. Yeah. And so that kind of got me more interested in it. I guess now that I think about it, I was in Europe in 1990. And so I got to watch some of the World Cup. I remember the opening match, Argentina and Cameroon, I think it was. And that was probably one of the greatest sporting events I'd ever seen on TV before. So that kind of piqued my interest.
1990 Italy, right? Where Cameroon had the very ancient player, over 40 or something like that, who used to dance at the corner flags.
Exactly. Roger Milla.
I was a child, and I remember that as well. That was a pretty vivid World Cup. Yeah.
Yeah. I was studying abroad in Ireland, and that was was that the first time Ireland made the World Cup? And so it was kind of a big deal there. The Pogues and the Dubliners put out a song, Jackie's Heroes. So that kind of got me into the excitement, I guess, that surrounds soccer in a way that maybe I hadn't experienced. I also went to a soccer game for the first time in Galway, where I lived, and that was pretty exciting as well, even though it was miserable, raining and muddy. And but so that kind of got me more interested in the sport, but just kind of on a casual basis. And then I completed my dissertation on a topic that had nothing to do with sports, really. And so then I got my job at UMass, and then I was looking for another project after that book came out. And I was not in a tenure track position, so I was sort of a contingent employee, didn't have access to a lot of resources. We had just had a child, and so I wasn't going to have an opportunity to spend a lot of money or time abroad in archives or libraries. My main field as a PhD student was modern Spain, so I would have had to travel to Spain and do research there. And there weren't as many online archives and libraries and materials available. So I was looking for topics that were a little bit more manageable. And I got interested in this Spanish boxer who was a heavyweight contender in the 20s and 30s. And then I knew there was a fairly large Spanish community in New York City. And so I started doing research about this boxer and his relationship to the city. And I was paging through a sports journal that was published in New York City in Spanish and looking for stories about boxing. And I kept coming across all these stories about soccer, and I just passed them by. And then it dawned on me at one point, there's a lot more about soccer in this journal than there is about boxing. So maybe I should dig into that a little bit. And I thought, well, I'll just go and read the books that talk about, soccer history in the U.S., especially in the 1920s and 30s. And I discovered that there was not really very much written at all, and almost none from people with an academic background. And so then I thought, well, maybe I should start researching the history of soccer in the U.S. And so that's kind of how I came to the topic.
Then comes your first book, the maybe definitive story of the game in America so far, with just a U.S. perspective. That came out just shortly before well, about a year or so, I think, before this podcast started. And to me was also a bit of a flashlight that, yeah, there's academics who are interested in some of this here as well, and something is bubbling. Now this, which is not a monograph, but a collection of essays, a tour of various cities, historic clubs, historic examples. Do you follow any of the teams that are in here? Who do you follow? Where do you see actual games? Where do you encounter the kind of soccer community that you research about in this book?
Yeah. Well, I mean, none of the teams that I talk about in the book only goes up to about 1920.
Yeah, they're all extinct.
Yeah, none of those teams have survived down to the present. Well, maybe I don't think in this book. In the other book, there are some teams that have reemerged or have some continuation that can go back to the 19th century, but not as they just are described in the book. Do I have a particular club? Not really. I mean, I mentioned my friend who supports FC Barcelona, and I just don't have the kind of emotional commitment that people have to. I have other sports that I have that emotional commitment to, like the Green Bay Packers in football and the New York Islanders in hockey. But I don't have a team in soccer that I have a genuine kind of commitment to. I do like it to see Spain do well internationally because of the time that I spent there and the years I spent studying Spain. Mm-hmm. I guess I have a fondness for those teams, but I don't really have an emotional attachment to any particular. I was telling my students, actually, I taught a course on history and video games, and then I also teach a course on history of soccer. And I was telling my students that I do have a kind of soft spot for Sunderland, Ipswich, and Nottingham Forest in England because I played those teams, or I managed those teams in Football Manager, the video game.
Yeah.
So I feel like I have a certain fondness for those clubs, having won the Premier League and the Champions League with those teams.
Yeah, right. But no one American soccer team that's particularly dear to your heart, where we would see you in the stands on weekends when the season is on?
No, okay. No, I don't really follow any of the U.S. clubs. Yeah, like the Women's League or the MLS. I don't really follow any of those clubs. So.
Maybe we can return to that at the end of the book and ask why that is, because you're not the only one who is interested in the game and doesn't have a concrete American soccer community that they support, that they're investing in. And I wonder what that tells us about the state of the game here as well. But first, book, by the way, the first one, I didn't mention that, is called From Football to Soccer. If you want to look that up and buy it as well. This one, Beyond the Field, How Soccer Built Community in the United States, came about as a collection of essays. And then the intro, and this will be my harshest critique today of the book, then the intro seems to, as a result of that collection of essays, seems to be a little light on argument. So what you say here is these stories represent a vision of the United States, or at least what this nation aspires to be. People of diverse backgrounds uniting around the ideas of companionship, fair play, and equal opportunity. Even though soccer is often considered a foreign game, the book demonstrates that the sport has a role in this history as well. Is that what America aspires to be? Is that how soccer fits in? Or does America, in fact, aspire to be something different? And that's why other sport cultures have grabbed the public attention much more than soccer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wasn't prepared to delve into that argument about why has soccer not become the national game in the United States. And I guess there are complex reasons.
The forever future national game, right? It's forever. Soccer is always kind of hot.
Right. Soccer always the game of the future. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I wrote this, or I conceived of the book, I suppose, as more of a kind of a narrative history and a collection of stories as opposed to an academic monograph that has a real, direct or, detailed thesis or argument attached to it. I think part of the thing, the history of soccer in this country, or the study of it, I suppose I should say, has come a long way in the last 10 or 15 years.
I agree. Yeah.
But I think we're still kind of in that, just kind of excavating and bringing stuff to people's attention because it had been neglected and not studied or not seen as important for so long. And so I think part of my goal, at least with these books, has been to just present the information, tell people we have this rich and interesting and important history with the game, even if it's not the national sport here in the way that it is in, many or most other countries around the world. So that was my goal.
And part of the claim of the book, I think, is in that. It's just in the scope. It's here and it's over there, and it's all kinds of different types of immigrants, and it's all different kind of social strata, and it's all different kinds of regions, and it's industry clubs, and it's, I think, paper pushers is what you call the team from San Francisco. It's all over the place, and you may not have noticed. That in itself is a claim.
Yeah, I mean, I did focus. I made a deliberate effort to focus on places that hadn't really been given much attention, because there are places like St. Louis or Fall River, Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, and New Jersey, where there has been a lot more attention given to those areas. And I thought that it was worth highlighting the fact that whether you were in Barre, Vermont, which is a very small town, or San Francisco, which is a major city, you do find these soccer communities.
How did you pick the spots to begin with? The list, and we're not going to go through the whole chapter, but the list takes us really over the entire continent. We start in Rhode Island. We end in Hawaii. So go west, young man, and grow up with the country. We crossed the Midwest, of course, a little bit too quickly for my taste. No Indiana in there, but Minnesota 2 times, and then we move on toward west. How did you pick the spots, find the stories, before we dive into what those stories actually are?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if you've noticed in the book, a lot of the photographs come from my own collection. So a lot of the stories kind of started there, that I had found these photographs and was curious about who the teams were, who the players were, how did they fit into the sporting histories or, of these particular communities. So part of it was me just doing the research because I was curious about who were the people. And I didn't necessarily have maybe a coherent plan, and then it just kind of kept going. And I realized, I have these different parts of the country. And then I started to look for places that, again, hadn't really been given much attention, and that I could find soccer communities in those areas. So Cincinnati was one I just kind of picked because it was, it kind of fit with trying to get representative places from different parts of the country. Some of the research I had already done for previous projects that I just never got around to finishing, like the San Francisco stuff. I had a podcast many years ago now, and the San Francisco one, or the chapter about the vampires, was originally a podcast episode.
Ah, okay.
So I kind of just collected these pieces over time, and then eventually I thought maybe I could do this book and try to show how soccer was in the Northeast and in the Midwest and in the South and in the West and even in Hawaii.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was just me coming across these stories, like a little hint or something in, say, Hawaii, and then coming back to it and digging in a little bit more deeply and trying to find some interesting stories that I could tell about the people and the places.
By the way, listeners, Brian just casually dropped the word vampires in there. The team is called the Bay Area Vampires. That's who we're talking about, not some conspiracy theory. Yeah. Okay. And then come the primary sources, and that's a lot of local newspapers I see that you looked into there. It used to be that when you wanted to look at rather old newspapers. You needed to actually have to travel to these archives, look at microfilm or something like that. Were you lucky? Are most of these digitized, fairly easily accessible now?
Yeah, almost all of them are digitally available, and that makes searching somewhat easier. So yeah, without newspapers.com and some of these other databases that are available, it would have been impossible to do the research. Part of the research was done, of course, during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So that was an easy way to pass the time sitting inside, searching through newspaper databases. I mean, it's amazing how much that's changed. I mean, this book wouldn't have been possible 5 years ago, maybe, and certainly not 10 years ago, just because of the amount of information that's become available. I remember.
Okay. You're the first historian who I hear saying that like this. So the book wouldn't have been possible were it not for the advances in the digitization. And we all noticed the trends. I mean, when I was in graduate school, which was super long ago, I could still apply to travel grants to go to places and look at microfilms. We have most of it in our living room right now. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, there's just not. I mean, the newspapers are the main source for this particular period of U.S. soccer history because, as we talked about before, the clubs don't exist. So there are no institutional archives anywhere, really, or haven't come to light, I should say. I mean, I always hold out hope that somebody somewhere has a bunch of boxes in their attic or something and they don't know and something comes to light. But so, yeah, we have to rely on the newspapers and then try to find little snippets and, other material where we can. So I tried to use the newspapers for the source, for the soccer part of the story, and then try to reconstruct the community part of the story using other kinds of materials.
Have you eventually, in the course of this, then found anybody who still is connected to these clubs who said, I have a few things sitting on my attic, I believe, or my grandfather? What kind of human connections with today have emerged in your research?
Not any. I mean, not any that I know of. No one has approached me or said anything. Sometimes people don't know exactly what they have. For instance, there's a chapter in the book on Barre, Vermont.
Yes. That's one of the best ones, I think. The granite, the stone cutters. I was going to get into that.
Yeah. So just a few hours. I live just a few hours from Barre.
Yeah.
And so I was able to go do some research at the Historical Society there. And I said I was there to look at some records of the Scottish Society that sponsored the annual picnic where they played soccer and they eventually bought a trophy to award to the state champion. And I said to the archivists and the librarians, well, I'm here to talk about or to look for soccer stuff. And they were like, there's no soccer stuff. And I said, there is actually. So even the archivists and the librarians sometimes don't know about this history or don't think that there is this history to be uncovered. So that was one of the archival trips I made. I also went to Rhode Island, which again is not too far away. So
one of the statements in the introduction is that, of course, many of these known stories are European immigrants who are bringing their game. But, and you make a point of that, that's not all that is happening. Asia, Africa, Latin America also play a role. Did you find that the game was played, perceived, lived out differently? What different contexts did you uncover here among ethnic communities in different needs, in different social settings, urban, small town, industrial labor, other types of work? What differentiates the American soccer landscape back then in the 1920s? And then we can still talk about what differentiates it today.
You mean what is different or distinct?
Yeah, regional differences that are contingent on what immigrant group we're talking about.
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I suppose some of the differences are just how sustainable the leagues are over time. I mean, some of the leagues and the clubs are pretty ephemeral and don't last very long. I mean, Buffalo was an example of that, where it kind of appears and then disappears for long periods and then kind of appears, but for a relatively short amount of time. And I mean, I stop at around 1920 because, of course, World War I has a huge impact pretty much everywhere. Because, as you said, a lot of the immigrants, particularly the British immigrants, either go home or join the Canadian Army or something like that. So a lot of the progress kind of stops with that. I'm trying to think about other kinds of differences.
Are there differences in what kind of social context happens around the club? I mean, often there's weddings at these clubhouses, right? There's funerals. There's a lot of life happening together. Is that different from region to region, from group to group? What else is going on other than the soccer?
I think that generally the ones, in the Northeast, and to a certain extent, maybe, lesser the case. I think the Northeast, it does tend to be maybe what we might call blue collar workers or industrial workers, miners, those sorts of figures. And then in some of the other areas, as you mentioned, Miami, San Francisco, Hawaii, it does tend to be more middle to upper class. So that's, I think, a pretty significant difference, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. Are there, other than examples of social cohesion and making meanings, are there examples of local rivalries as well, where stuff actually gets heated and soccer is not the uniting factor, but you have derbies between groups, amongst cities, or between cities? Anything you found there?
Yeah, I mean, I think usually there was one and maybe two teams in any given location, depending on the size. I mean, San Francisco is different because it's just much bigger than the rest of the communities that I'm looking at. I mean, in Buffalo, you had the two clubs, the Rangers and the Nomads, and then you had the club from Niagara Falls, which was probably better. So there were those kinds of rivalries. I mean, there were really only two clubs in Miami for the most part. So yeah, usually there was one or two clubs that tended to dominate in each particular area. And again, maybe the exception is San Francisco, which had enough of a population to support, much bigger league play than in some of the other cities where you only have a handful of teams. And some teams would come and go, drop out one season, reappear the next, maybe be in the league for a couple of seasons and then disappear. So I think, yeah, with the exception of San Francisco, most of the places had only one. Portland had Portland, and then, the other rivals from a different city. Those were pretty standard. But yeah, I mean, they just weren't large enough generally to sustain or to support a tremendous number of clubs.
Yeah. I did an episode earlier this year about Fort Wayne FC, one of these classic immigrant clubs founded by German immigrants. A lot of social life around it. If you look at their clubhouse, it clearly is more than just a place to change your soccer cleats. A lot of space there and good community cohesion. The club is no longer distinctively ethnically German, but it's existed all this way through. That's not the case for the clubs that you're looking at here. Why do they end? Does this dovetail with the theories we have about acculturation in American history and how that works, right? Is this a matter of eventually the children, if they want to become American, they rather play basketball and football and move away from soccer? Does the lifespan of these clubs overlap with some of what we're seeing in immigrants and in acculturation during that time?
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. As I said, World War I really provides kind of an endpoint for a lot of these communities, although, soccer does pick up, and in some ways in the 1920s is sort of the golden age of soccer in the U.S., at least professionally, I would say, and maybe until now. So, yeah, I mean, there's the war. I think you're right that it is partly a process of that kind of change over time. Maybe new people become more interested in playing the sort of traditional American sports like baseball and, American football. So that's part of it. I mean, there are also economic issues, when the stonecutters go on strike or the economy takes a downturn or something like that,
Yeah.
then they don't have the time or the money, or they relocate. I mean, I think that's a pretty common theme too, is that people move from city to city in seek of work or in search of different opportunities. They might go back to Scotland or England or Wales or wherever they originally immigrated from. So I think a lot of the communities, they are kind of shifting in terms of the populations. I mean, another factor, I guess, is that they often have somebody or some small group of people who are kind of like the key figures in organizing and keeping these things going. And so if that person leaves town or that person dies or, that person gets too old to do it, then nobody
kind of stand or fall with them.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, another factor in explaining why they don't necessarily persist.
You mentioned World War One. That is a high time of nativism. I know of examples of religious immigrant communities encountering a lot of pressure to put American flags in your church and show that you truly belong. Do these soccer clubs encounter similar things in what you found?
I mean, soccer, there's definitely, you could go back to the turn of the 20th century and you can find people critical of soccer as calling it a foreign sport. And
okay, so to charges of lack of patriotism.
Yeah, I mean, I think I quote in the chapter on Buffalo where somebody says basically that this is, Americans should play football. Soccer is for Europeans and Canadians and not for us, kind of a thing. So that's definitely a charge that is leveled fairly often, I would say, throughout, especially the 20th century. But, it has early roots, that's for sure. So it's I don't know if it's so much a result of the war necessarily, but I do think it is a criticism that the sport has and maybe has always had, at least, once you get the codification of American football, there's a clearer separation there, and people start to say that other game, the kicking game is not American.
When is that, by the way? I don't know this, the codification of American football.
It really begins in the 1870s and 80s.
Okay, that early. See, I didn't know that. Right.
And I mean, it goes in fits and starts, and the rules are rewritten again in the 20th century. But, by the time you get into the 1890s or so, American football is pretty well established, at least on the college level. I mean, professional football in the U.S. doesn't really become big until the 1950s or 60s.
Yeah. I mean, it strikes me that this is a difference to what is going on in Europe at the time, that there is some debate about the belonging of the game in the actual country. There's plenty of debate in Europe about whether the game belongs into certain classes, right? Is this too rough? Or even, is this a section for richer British, a game for richer British folks, but not for us? Is this a British colonizers game, but not for, but this kind of, there's an American sport and this is not it dynamic, that's faced differently by the early footballing generations in Europe at the time. The other thing that strikes me as really different is I don't know if I can say lack of organization, but the league pyramid that as a European who grew up with football that you're used to begins to be established during this time, even on a local level. And then at some point you have national championships and they happen in playoff format, but you have something. These are largely just independent leagues who are not linked with each other, who don't provide relegation. That's in the system early on. Why is that? Because that drags its way through, and you have this debate right now, the USL moving to relegation and promotion. Is it just a geographical of how vast this country is? But it strikes me that the leagues, organizations, and federations, that's very different from Europe from the get-go. And I think that's a baked-in difference that has gone through until today.
Yeah. I mean, I think people who are not from the U.S. sometimes underestimate how big the U.S. is.
Yes.
And so it's
Yes,
so much
absolutely.
easier to organize a national league, let's say in England, than it is across the US. I mean, we do have national baseball leagues, of course, by the end of the 19th century. So it was possible, but
Well, even like a regional league with, I don't know, 3 tiers and the
yeah.
stonecutters go up and down. That doesn't exist. Are these wildcat leagues? Do they just come together based on demand?
Yeah, I mean, there's just not enough teams, and there's not enough money, and there's not enough time. Probably, I mean, the time it would take to travel, even from, let's say, New York to Boston, which is a relatively short distance, can take a long time to travel there, and then for what kind of a payoff? The payoff might not be enough to even cover the cost of transportation. So I think it's partly the distances involved, but maybe it's about the money too, that it's just not lucrative enough to sustain these leagues and to make them, even regional leagues. There are times when they try to do that, to form a league, let's say, that might include Detroit, Chicago, St. Louis, and they're never able to pull it off really, because it's just too expensive and they don't make enough money.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of these teams have some company backgrounds. So they're formed by workers of the same company or a couple of companies, or they play on company property. Is there any sponsorship relations there? Does any company captain ever say, like the owners of Thames Ironworks did when West Ham United was founded, we'll fund this team. It's important for our company to we'll fund this team. Is that a thing in the US at the same time? And maybe you can have some examples from the book as well for those who haven't read it.
I mean, again, I think it depends on certain individuals who might be affiliated with the firm or the company that's involved, who take an interest, who take a liking. It's really difficult to find any kind of specific information about companies doing anything more than, say, agreeing to let teams play on a patch of land, or they might donate a cup. But I've done.
What about company names on shirts? Because I did see that in some pictures. Is that simply the players claiming the name of a company?
Yeah, I mean, the cover photo of the book is a team from Fall River that played in the Buffalo Exposition in 1901. And the reason they have the name on the shirt is because that was a local furniture company that paid, they paid for the kit. So that's a relatively unusual kind of a thing to have a company logo on the shirt at this particular time. Social clubs was maybe a bit more common, but it is pretty unusual. There are some other examples, but generally speaking, it's really been hard to figure out exactly how the companies supported the clubs, whether they did that directly through, financially. One of the chapters in the previous book is about a team in Holyoke, Massachusetts that played in the American Soccer League, which began in 1921. And I actually went through the company records. A lot of them still exist. And I couldn't find any references at all in the account books or anything to direct payments made or even paying for transportation or kits or anything like that. So if it did exist, it doesn't appear in the company ledgers as far as I can tell. So I think it's usually just somebody who's affiliated with the company, and then they form. I mean, in Buffalo, it was the car company, and that employees.
There's the Laceworks team as well. I like that.
Yeah. I mean, they do. Usually, the club would name the president or some important person in the company. Could be the honorary chairman of the club or something like that. So
secure goodwill. Did any companies actually protest? Because to have your workers play soccer and have spectators around the ground is a form of workers' organization. Are there any companies that really don't like to see that?
Not that I've found. I mean, I think the companies were happy that their workers were not gambling or drinking or doing other sorts of things that might lead them to miss work, or even going to the union hall, for example. Those are all things the companies disliked even more than than the soccer. I think they probably thought it was just a healthy, harmless pursuit that kept the people busy and not organizing or carousing or gambling, doing other sorts of things that might cause them to miss work.
Yeah. So there's work and there is recreation. What about the other opium of the masses? What about religion? There's not a lot in the book about that. That's the other big puzzle piece that makes up immigrants' world and identity very often. Are there some connections that teams have? Is there pushback? Does organizing in sports provide an alternative to organizing around religious clubs and societies and churches, you think? Especially because these are often young men.
Yeah. In most of the places that I've looked at, I don't see a strong connection with religion. The place in the United States where there is that connection is St. Louis, where the Catholic Church organized leagues, and they had these men
and Jewish teams.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one place where there is that direct connection is St. Louis, but I didn't find anything really similar in any of the places that I studied. There were some, I mean, as far as I know, none of the places, the churches made any kind of, direct effort to use recreation again as a way of keeping young men, especially, away from immoral and things like that. Or
even speak out against recreation because it distracts from other more religious pursuits. I don't know. It wouldn't have been surprising to find that either. Yeah.
Well, Massachusetts had laws, of course, that you couldn't play sports on Sundays. So
of course, the Sabbath, yes.
So as long as they had that, I suppose the church people were happy that they were. It wasn't taking away from any religious activities potentially.
Who was in the stands during that time? Who was watching? There's this lovely picture of the ground, the field in, is it Scranton? No, it's Vermont. Yes, the Berlin Street grounds. And there are people seated on a stand. The whole shape looks a bit more baseballish, but you're saying that both sports were played on this field. And then there's what looks like a standing terrace as well. And there's quite a few people on it. Mm-hmm. Who was watching soccer games at the time in Scranton, in the two Minnesota towns, in Bear, Vermont?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the people from the community. So other workers, families, people in these social clubs.
You have this one super fan, right? The old lady from Scotland who gets portrayed in a newspaper. Isn't that in Vermont as well?
Yeah, that's in Barrie, Vermont.
Yeah.
So she was connected to the Scottish society that organized the things. And she apparently, like I said, was recognized in the newspaper for being a great supporter of the team. And so, I mean, there were men, women, and children in the stands, sometimes in large numbers, sometimes not so much. So I think they were just probably reflective of the community from which these clubs emerged.
Do you have a sense of how many of these clubs were organized by membership? I noted Fort Wayne FC from the beginning as this German model of it's a member-owned society, and we also play soccer. Is that the template? Or is the template 11 dudes, we want to play, give us a shirts and a ball, and whoever comes pays, and that's what we'll do?
A lot of the clubs do emerge from particular societies and clubs, or at least have strong connections to those. So I think it depends. It could be societies and clubs. It could be workplace. Like in Miami, for instance, you have the people who are working on the Deering estate. They kind of formed their own club, and then the Orr family kind of forms their own club because they have so many people. But so there's a lot of different ways. They can come out of clubs, other kinds of societies, like, in some cases, like in Minneapolis and St. Paul, you do have Scottish societies who organize soccer teams and then compete against each other. And then, as we talked about, there are workers from the silk factory, from the mines or the coal mines that that form the clubs. So it's kind of a combination of different things.
You're a historian. I'm not going to ask you about the future yet, but I'm going to ask you about the present. What patterns, in any way, shape, or form, what patterns of sport and culture are there in this book that you think we still find in the American soccer landscape today? What threads, trends, anything you might think of that connects this to what the world is about to see next summer, right?
Yeah. Well, it is that idea that soccer is going to be the future, or that somehow soccer is going to be anything other than it is now, I guess.
That idea is already there, right? So 100 years ago, the boom was always just around the corner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't think it's ever going to replace other sports. I mean, you never say never, especially given the physical problems that result from football, American football. But that's something that people going back to the 19th century say, that soccer is somehow going to take over and displace these other sports. And I think we still see that today, that, I think there's an unwillingness among a lot of fans of the sport to accept its position in this country, especially when we look at other countries and we think, why can't we be like Spain or Germany or Italy or wherever, Turkey or something, where it's this frenzied national sport. And
I think for most Americans, the frame of reference is England.
Yeah. And it's just never going to be like that. I mean, I always find it interesting that, the only English speaking country where it becomes the national game except England is Scotland, and everywhere else there's something else, Canada, Australia, the US, Ireland, Wales.
I say that too. It's not just an American thing. There are dynamics of British history unfolding here more than anything else. Because you see the same phenomenon in you said New Zealand, Australia. Mm-hmm.
I think the other theme that constantly runs through U.S. soccer history and is probably still exists is the acrimony and the constant infighting that seems to go or take place, in that, a lot of times clubs and leagues fall apart because they start to disagree with each other over various things, and they just collapse as a result of that. And that's a thread that you can find continuously almost throughout U.S. soccer history. And I think it might be a lesser problem today, but I think it still exists. I mean, there was that recently that lawsuit about the New York Cosmos trademark.
Yes. David, listen up, former guest on this program. Yeah.
So I think that's unfortunately a pretty common kind of thread that runs through U.S. history.
And soccer, the hope in soccer becoming something big is also forever and always associated with and on the shoulders of immigrants, right? Mm-hmm. That too hasn't changed. And that today is too, the more Hispanic the United States will be, the more soccer will be part. That's a theme as well still, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes I like to try to suggest that maybe we think about success, I suppose, of soccer in this country, maybe in other terms than, is it the national sport, or is it this hugely lucrative professional league? Because if you look at other metrics, the number of kids who play soccer in this country is huge, or have played soccer at some point in their life.
A lot of people have played this game, more and more. No.
The popularity of video games like FIFA or whatever it's called now, I can't remember what they changed the name to.
You mean a video game? I have no idea either. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's been huge, for a decade or maybe even more than that. And people who never watch soccer or never play soccer, play that video game. So I think if we sort of look at other, or maybe answer that question in different ways, we can see that soccer has been successful in this country, just not in the way that we tend to imagine it to be. So
adjust your expectations, Americans, and adjust your expectations, Europeans, too, who might come here next year and take the pulse on how soccer is doing in the U.S. The standards of England or Spain or Germany aren't the only standards by which to measure progress, or by which to measure growth, or by which to measure how life-giving that game can be to people in this country, spectators and players, and many, many kids too.
And I think that's also something that I try to do in the books, is to say that it may not be our national game, but we do have this very long and relatively rich history, with the sport. And I think a lot of people, not just people outside this country, but people inside this country, even sometimes people who are involved in, U.S. soccer, don't believe that we have any kind of long history, or don't know that we have this long history that we can point to. In some ways older, and I could rattle off the list of firsts or seconds that the U.S. is in terms of global soccer, but I won't. So that's another way in which I think we can measure the sport, is to say, well, we have a really rich and interesting history. It's just different than it is in those other countries.
When the world comes to the United States next year, or World Cup fans come to the United States next year, where would you recommend they look for the kinds of stories that, well, the ones that you've uncovered or similar ones that are playing out today?
That's a good question.
It doesn't need to be where geographically, but where do you need to have your eyes open?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there are, smaller teams, much like, I guess, people maybe might be more familiar with sort of baseball, whereas there's these minor league teams or smaller teams where the game is maybe not quite as commercialized. So that's one place.
So everything that's not on Apple TV, all right? So USL below, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, school soccer can be, I suppose, another area, or college.
I totally think high school and college soccer is people should go to. I mean, the experience of college sports and high school sports in and of itself is radically different here than it is in Europe. I've never seen anything like it, and I'm not at a big college. The structure, how it's woven into the community, it has perhaps the closest resemblances that I can imagine to member-owned clubs because of this lifelong loyalty type of thing, right? You can't just switch your college loyalties to another college. You went where you went, and that's where you support, which is much closer to how Europeans come to support their team as well. And I see more of that here than in the professional segment of how the game is played in America. I would say cities, urban areas, immigrant communities, that's for sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think in a lot of places,
progressive subcultures too.
Yeah, just down the street from my house, there's a set of fields, and every Sunday there's some folks out there playing just a pickup game. It's not 11 versus 11 with full-size nets and all that kind of stuff. But I think you can probably find that in a lot of places.
I would even say you can almost find that more than in Europe now. I hear these complaints all the time in Austria that the era of where people would go out in the streets and in the parks to just shoot a ball around is gone. All we have now are players who have been streamlined through these academy systems. I see a lot of random outside spontaneous football going on in the U.S.
I think I remember reading something about how one reason why Spain has been so good internationally, over the last however many years on both the men's and the women's side, is that the country has spent money to create these areas where people can play, and they're not necessarily grassed areas, but there are these areas that you can go and play soccer, and it if it's a small area and it's it
often looks like a cage,
paved, yeah. And so it does kind of reward the very quick, nimble dribbling and technical ability, which is what is characterizes the men and the women's teams at the top level. So
But I want to see those sliding tackles, which is why I liked your Vermont story so much. If you could bring any team back to life from this book, which one would it be? Let's say transported to a USL 2 or something like that. Which was the most endearing? Where's the kind of stories? I wish that story would have continued.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Rhode Island now has a team that plays. It's not the Wanderers or any of those clubs that I talk about at this time, but that club has sort of been resurrected, or at least a soccer club in Pawtucket has been kind of resurrected. I mean, I guess the team, I guess it depends on, do you mean bring back a team just to have a team to root for, or bring back a team so that I could ask questions of the player?
No, not for research purposes. Just a team that seems to have a kind of community, a kind of spirit that it would be lovely to still have that transported into the 21st century.
Yeah. I mean, Barrie is such a small town compared to the other places. Barrie
could be the Green Bay of soccer.
Yeah, exactly. And it does seem like
European
it was
listeners, sorry. Again, if you don't know what we're talking about, Green Bay Packers are the only member-owned team in American professional sports. Play American football.
Yeah, the only team owned by the fans. I think Barrie, it does seem like that team and that community was much smaller and so much maybe more closely knit together. Mm-hmm. And I could see that being a kind of appealing, dynamic for sure. I mean, we talked about the Vampires before. That's just such a great name. And we mentioned
copyrighted somewhere, or could you get that copyright?
That's a good question. They didn't have, they would have bats on some of their kit. So
this is the one thing that I'm noticing throughout the book. There are inklings here that Americans are just better at marketing than Europeans. Throughout. No, when you can find like invites to games or slogans, newspaper headlines, team uniforms, team names, very creative stuff in there. Yeah. Good. Very nice. What will you be doing in the future of your research with any of this? You're very active, and you should say where people can find you. So the U.S. Soccer History blog, for example, has a good bunch of your ongoing work on it, and you can read articles from Brian there. We'll link that in the show notes. What else is in the making here? Are you continue your soccer journey, or eventually are you at the point now that you've sold so many books on soccer that you can't afford that trip to Spain to the archives?
Right. Yeah. No, I'm working on a book. There's a series of books from a publisher called The Experiment Publishing, and it's called the Shortest History series.
Yes.
So we have books like The Shortest History of Germany or Shortest History of Europe.
Yep.
And I'm working on the Shortest History of Soccer now, which is a kind of global history.
Okay, so a short version of David Goldblatt's book. No.
Right, exactly.
A very short compendium about the game. Excellent.
So it's supposed to be out hopefully by the World Cup. So I have to have it in a couple of 6 weeks or something. Mm-hmm. So that's what I've been working on. There's a lot of U.S. soccer stuff in there.
Good.
After that, I'm not sure. I have been kind of interested in 1891, a group of Canadian and American players went on a playing tour of the UK and Ireland. And they played something like 52 matches in just over, I can't remember exactly how many days it was. But they had they were playing a game, every couple of days.
Oh my goodness! Sounds like weeks. Worse than the Club World Cup this summer.
Yeah, so they visited, pretty much anywhere and everywhere in the UK. Glasgow, Dublin, games in Wales. Played clubs that are still around, like, it wasn't West Ham then, but
Thames Ironworks.
Yep. Arsenal really? Played. Wonderful. Sunderland they played. They played representative, or what were called national teams, but were just picked players of English or Scottish or Welsh descent or something like that.
Yeah.
That's a project that I've been kind of interested in. So I might pick that
transatlantic. A transatlantic soccer history. Hmm.
Yeah. If I did have all that money that you mentioned, I think it would be great to recreate it, travel around to all the towns that they visited in the course of that tour. That would be pretty interesting, but
Yeah, but it's Great Britain. It's not that large. You might be able to just rent a car and
that's true.
drive around.
Yeah. But that would be kind of an ideal situation, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. But that's possibility, future plans, I suppose.
Well, we enjoyed this book. Well, we have it for now. Beyond the Field, How Soccer Built Community in the United States. We travel from Rhode Island all the way to Hawaii. We encounter all kinds of players, all kinds of immigrants, and all kinds of stories that, if nothing else, make one point very clear. This game is woven into United States history in different ways than it's woven into the history of other countries, but it's woven into it. It's everywhere. The players are everywhere. It's being played all over the place, and its social significance comes through in these pages very well. Some super interesting anecdotes and stories in there. We mentioned the female Scotland superfan. Was there anyone for you that about a person where you looked them up, did a name search or did a census search, probably as I would have done as well, and something really interesting emerged that ended up in the book?
Well, I will, if I can just back up.
Yes.
One of the things you said is that I think it does show how unique in some ways the history of soccer is in this country. But I think having had to go back and reread a lot of the history of soccer in other parts of the world for this book project that I'm currently writing, I was struck by how a lot of the questions, a lot of the issues, a lot of the features, particularly in this early period of the late 19th and early 20th century, are pretty common across, whether it's England or Spain or Italy or Germany. A lot of those questions, a lot of the issues that come up in those contexts also come up here. So there are a lot of similarities, and I think, alongside the obvious differences as well. But you can find all kinds of things like, the relationship between a company and the club, the relationship between a society and the club, the relationship between finding places to play, professionalism, all of those issues come up, which are pretty common in other contexts as well. So
unique.
People of James Matthews, the guy from Minnesota who joined the Canadian Army.
Yes.
A good story, I thought. I mean, a tragic story. No, I don't want to give any spoilers, but
that's right. That's something that we should not. It's at the end of the chapter that we shouldn't give away. Yeah. But that was something that emerged from your research as a kind of a surprise finding. I find that image, by the way, beautiful in that chapter of the road into the village, because I don't know. I see there's videos playing in my head when I look at this of all the people that people this chapter, and that's exactly what you want as an author, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I did try. I think there's a lot of interesting stories. I tried to pick, like I said, to get a good coverage of the country, but then also to try. Once I settled on a particular spot, I did try to find some individuals that had an interesting story. Like the woman we were talking about who was a fan, she had a large number of children, many of whom didn't survive. So that was kind of an interesting story to do, research sort of infant mortality during this period.
More, I think double the national average, I think, in that of death of children in that family. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I enjoyed most about the book researching the book was that I had to learn all kinds of things about all sorts of subjects that I knew nothing about, such as infant mortality in the late 19th century or coal mining in northeastern Pennsylvania or
Those are
granite
super
work.
impressive pictures too, by the way, and a super impressive description of the scents and the sounds. The beginning of the Scranton, Pennsylvania chapter, where you see this looks like a cathedral. Cathedrals have beautiful windows. These didn't. This looks like a cathedral. These collieries, right? These massive structures that are looming over these villages that have been purely rural just a couple of years before. That's a beautiful start to chapter 2.
Yeah, I mean, it was really
sorry for the nerding out listeners.
It was just fun to try to, like I said, it's written to be more accessible and not as an academic book, and I think that can be a really freeing experience.
But it's University of Illinois Press picked it up, so this is the academic publisher. It's been peer reviewed and all that. This isn't just Brian's nighttime musings in book form. So, but it's meticulously researched. You got notes, by the way, dear reader, after every chapter. With archival notes as well, end notes, but still, I would agree. Yes, very accessible, vivid storytelling throughout.
But it was really, like I said, I don't know if fun maybe doesn't quite capture it, but it was really an enjoyable experience to try to again evoke something about the communities and not just focus exclusively on the club. This team beat this team, or this was the competition and this was the cup and that kind of stuff. So it was nice to be able to sort of tell those larger stories and try to paint those pictures, which I'm happy that you found it successful. That's good to hear.
I think it is. So does Peter Aligi, by the way, who was also on this podcast before, and blurbs it on the back of the book. So trust us and go out by it. I think you will have a similar problem with European listeners as David Goldblatt has with American ones. It's not as easy to get your book in Europe, I presume. If people really want that, I'm sure they can email me or contact you, find some kind of way. Amazon is everywhere as well. And in the US, it's very simple. The University of Illinois Press has it out. Thanks to them, by the way, for picking that up as well. And yeah, should read it sometime before the World Cup and get to know all the history that there is in it. Because part of what this soccer is forever the future game mentality has done is it's almost always painted the past of soccer as a little irrelevant because the golden age is just coming and everything that's been is kind of little in comparison, when it isn't. It's not little in comparison, and it's worth a history of its own, and you've demonstrated that well.
Well, thank you again for having me. It's been a good time talking with you.
Yeah. No, I'm glad we got this out. I won't ask you the future questions, but the World Cup summer is happening next year. Any chance for the U.S. national team? I think you think to do well.
I think they'll maybe do better than a lot of people might expect. But it's really difficult to predict. I mean, it so much depends on what group they get in.
Such a big tournament now. Austria's qualified this past week, and I don't know if we're in second or the third pot yet, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think they're not title contenders. They should probably be able to get out of the group stage, that
would totally be a success. So in the US, the discourse, especially by media that spends less time on soccer, the expectation is the US needs to be a title contender. I don't think it needs to be for this World Cup to be a success for the game in this country.
Yeah. I mean,
quarterfinals are realistic.
For the expanded format, I think still the number of contenders is probably still pretty small, but who knows? We could be surprised, I suppose.
I would like a U.S. against Austria game somewhere. Might be cool.
Are you planning on going?
Oh, the last World Cup, Qatar, is the first season of this podcast, and I was pretty much boycotting it. And it wasn't hard for me either because national teams have never drawn me in the same way. My sense of belonging and games where there's really stuff at stake, that all happens on club level. For me, or games here at the college I teach at. But the whole national flag waving thing, I don't know. I could never get into it. This next year, I will not be able to ignore it. And since Austria is qualified, my children are double citizens. We're going to follow this and we'll throw our hat in the ring. The ticket lottery for the Austrian path. So
Oh, okay.
see what shakes out.
Yeah. I mean, people ask me, do you want to go? And I would say if somebody wants to give me a ticket, I'll probably go, but it's just so expensive.
Yeah, that's crazy. No, the only way to, I think, for us to get it would be the Austrian Federation net path.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I'd support Bosnia too if they qualify, but
is West Ham your club team then, or do you?
West Ham is my English club team, as listeners know. That came to me well, I didn't want to pick a Premier League team, but I spent 2 summers in London. I visited West Ham's old stadium when they were still playing there, and that it caught me by surprise and caught me for good in turns of following too. But it probably also caught me because there's quite some commonalities between West Ham and the team that I grew up with in Austria, Sturm Graz. I'm a member of, so it's an Austrian Bundesliga team, and that is the club that's been passed on to me from my dad, and that's why I'm a Sturm fan. That's as simple as it is.
Yeah. Well, that's why I said earlier that I never had that kind of connection to
this multi-generational. I think I heard you say that in an interview somewhere as well. That just isn't there in the US. You might now have multi-generational fans of international teams, and with some clubs now nearing the professional clubs, nearing the 30-year mark, 40-year mark. I don't know where Chicago Fire, for example, how old they are, but we've got to be almost at the second generation there as well.
Yeah, I think for some of the MLS clubs, you certainly could have second generations by this point.
Yeah.
But I think the big thing missing is probably just that connection. I don't know. I feel like it's something different because I think Americans have a different relationship with their favorite sports team than Europeans do, because as you said, you got it from your father, but also a lot of times people, they live near or, close to the stadium in a way that we don't generally.
It was a streetcar ride for me from school to the ground. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I went to Everton to see. That's the only English Premier League match I've ever seen was at Everton's old stadium, and
lovely. It's a good place.
It was amazing that you're right there. Like there are houses like across the street from the stadium in a way that you just don't get in this country, really. I mean, I mentioned the Green Bay Packers, and I guess Lambeau Field is kind of like that. There used to be residential neighborhoods right there that you could walk to, but that's not really the case. And now that I guess is gone because Goodison Park is not, or at least the men's club is not playing there any longer. So
yes, that's correct. Though I like the harkening back to the old Goodison Park, and behind the goals, above the stands, they have like recreated the trellises that kind of look like.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. Looks good. So I found that a nice nod. However, that's not the topic of the book. We'll say goodbye for now and continue this off the air. Thank you for your time, and be well, Brian. Look forward to your next research and projects.
Thank you.